guys, welcome to another video. My name's Corey J and I'll be your teacher today. In today's class, we're going to be making these super awesome galaxy coasters. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different tips and tricks on how to get different designs and a whole bunch of different effects that will create a galaxy. Now I've used these effects in a lot of my paintings to get different star effects and halo effects and moon effects. And so I wanted to show you a couple of the pieces that I use them on so that after this class, if you want to take what you learned and apply it into your paint practice, you have some ideas. Okay, so this first piece I want to show you is actually a piece that's behind me, but I'm going to pop it up right here. It's called Dino Floss. And you can see that I created an atmospheric-like background. So there's a dark background, kind of like galaxy effect with lots of stars. Now this is another one of my paintings. It's called Family Matters. And as you can see, I use the orb and star effect around the top of the painting. There's all those little splatters and different light orbs. So I'm going to show you how to create that today. And lastly, I wanted to show you this painting here. This piece is called Symphonic Sphinx, and you can see that there's a moon and there's a halo around the moon and a bunch of different stars and splatter effects. So I'm going to show you some of these techniques today too. Okay, now we're going to start off with supplies. For this class, I use acrylic paint, and I just wanted to show you some of the colors I use the most. So you're going to get a white and a black. So titanium white and Mars black are my favorite. And then I also used primary red, close to primary blue, and a pink color. So those are the ones that I use the most, but then I also use a little bit of orange and a little bit of yellow as well. Next, you're going to need some paint brushes. So here I have just a medium brush and a little detail brush, but of course, use what you have. Then you're going to need some of the basics. So I have a water jug here. I like using a glass recycled water jug. Then I have a little cup that's going to help me make a circle. And also I'll need a cup to mix some white paint and some water in. I also will be using a painting palette. I like using these recyclable lids because you can peel off the paint from them. I just got it from a recycled food container. And then you're also going to need a white pencil crayon, but if you don't have a white pencil crayon, you can just use a pencil. Now for this class, I'm going to be using these coasters. They're just wooden coasters and they're circular, and then they also come with this little piece of cork that has a sticky surface on the back, so you can just adhere them together when you're done your project. So that's what I'm going to be using for my coasters today. And then I have a couple of items that are optional. So I have this Posca marker. This is an acrylic paint marker, and it's just a thin white one. I have an acrylic liquid glazing gloss. This I use just a tiny amount of, so this is super optional. And also any acrylic medium will do. This is just a liquid gloss, but a matte medium would work fine too. And then lastly, I have this liquid varnish. So this liquid varnish along with a little foam brush, this is totally optional. I just suggest it to protect the coaster after we're done the painting, as we are going to be putting drinks on top and using them, and it just helps protect it from the wear. Okay, so now that we have all our supplies, let's get into the project. Okay, so to start, I'm going to use these wooden coasters that I got here, and I'm going to grab a palette, as well as my paintbrush here and some black acrylic paint. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to paint these coasters all with a coat of black. Now, the first one that I didn't do in the best way. So what I did was I painted the front first. So I put a coat of this black acrylic paint on the front. And then when I was trying to paint the sides of the coaster, it got super messy. So you'll see that I have a better strategy for the other three that I painted. But basically what you want to do is you want to paint the front of the coasters all black, and then you want to go ahead and do the sides. And here, if you paint the front first like this, you can see that as you're trying to paint the sides and rotate the coaster around, it gets quite messy. So I have a better strategy for the next 3. So we got our first one done. I'm going to wipe off my hands because I got quite messy. And then for these next 3, what you want to do is you want to start off by painting the sides first. So if you paint the sides first, you'll be able to rotate the disc in the middle and it'll be a much cleaner process. So this is what I recommend to do for the rest of them. But basically you just want to go ahead and paint the entire sides just with this matte black acrylic paint, and then you want to paint the fronts as well. And this is going to be the base of our Galaxy coasters here. This black background will be what we use to paint everything on top of. So once you have all the sides painted, then you can go ahead and paint the fronts. And actually by this time, if you do it this way by painting all the sides first, when you go back to paint the front of the first one, the sides will be a little bit more dry and a little bit less messy. So here I'm just finishing up the last one here and any little extra green parts. So because these are wood, there is little bits of green that you might have to go over, like on this side here. You can see little bits on a couple of the other ones that I just finished up. And then you have your black base. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab some blue paint and some pink paint. And I will be adding a little bit of red later on, just so you know, but we're going to start with this blue and pink. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make the first layer out of 2 of the background. So I'm going to go ahead and take some of the blue and some of the pink here and just start to swirl my brush all around. Now this part is very free. You don't have to be exact on it. You just want to make some kind of atmosphere with the paint. And as you can see, because this is the first layer, the paint is going to come out very muted by the black. And you can even add in a little bit of black back into the coaster and mix it all in with the paint as you go here. But basically you just want to add swirls of the blue and swirls of the pink. Here I'm adding a little bit black in as well. And just create that kind of atmosphere that looks like that you can see in the Galaxy. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. And really you can do this with any type of brush. So as long as your brush is about medium size, it'll be pretty easy for you to do. And don't worry about the paint not showing up too well here, because we're going to go back over all of these with a second coat, and you'll see as you start to layer the paint, it's going to show up better. So you're just going to go in with the blue and the pink and kind of make a random design all around each of these coasters. And it doesn't have to be perfect, and you kind of want to make each of them look a little bit different, but you don't really have to try and do that because it'll just probably turn out that way anyway. But basically, you can also think about these as little clouds, so atmospheric clouds. So here you can see with the pink, that kind of looks like a cloud that I just made. So that's a good way to think about it as you're painting. And then you're going to go ahead and do the rest of them in the same kind of technique. So I start with one color, I move it around the palette here or the little disc, and then I grab another color and mix it in, adding little bits of black back in just to have everything nice and mixed together. And you don't want any harsh lines here. Everything you want to be pretty blended out. And then you're going to go through and just continue to do that for each of the next coasters until you get all the way done your first coat. And again, this is a good time to just turn on some music and vibe out while you do this, because it's very relaxing, especially since you're not trying to make it look like anything. You're basically just adding in your first layer of paint here to be the Galaxy atmosphere. So you're just going to go through and finish up this last coaster here with your first layer. And just finishing up here. And that's great. So this is what my first layer looked like. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit of that red paint. And I'm going to go through and do a second layer. So with this layer, I'm going to be a little bit more intentional about where I place colors. But basically, I'm going to be doing the same thing. So I'm going to be grabbing a little bit of each color and adding it on. And as you can see, as this is the second layer here, you can see that the paint is going to show up quite a bit better. So you're just going to go through and create these kind of cloud shapes all around the discs. And as you go around, you want to think about having the colors distributed evenly. So for example, if I have blue on the bottom here, I'm going to add a little blue across the top. You don't want it to be all one color in one area. You want to have a nice balance of all your colors going out through everything. And another thing that you can look to create here is little areas where there's a really strong color. So like you can see with this red here, there are some areas that I'm not blending out with the red, and that kind of helps to create these kind of like cloud-like atmospheric shapes and gives the piece a little bit more dimension. If you go ahead and you blend everything out, it's not going to look as dynamic or as interesting. So here you can see there's some areas where the color is very strong and then other areas where I've blended it out. And so now is a good time to add in those details with the color strength being really strong in some areas and then blending it out in other areas. And the way to blend it out is just taking your brush, especially a brush that has less paint on it, and just keep going over an area a couple times, and that'll help blend it in or blend it out depending on what you want to do. And then here, as I'm getting close to the end here, almost being done this fourth coaster here, I'm sort of working them all at the same time. So you can see that I might go to one and add a little bit of extra color to one on the bottom or one on the top, and just kind of finishing off this second layer for each of the discs. And kind of looking at them all the same time and just saying, okay, which one needs a little bit more of this color? And it's a good time when you have that color on your brush to check out the other ones and just move it across so that you don't have to keep cleaning your brush off. And actually with this project, I don't clean my brush off. I just let all the colors blend together and pick up more of one color and more of the other, because it just helps that blended kind of look to these coasters. And okay, so it looks like I'm getting near the end here, and this is what my second layer looks like. Okay, so once those have dried, I'm going to start to do a couple of different designs. So I'm going to give you some different ideas of different designs that you can do, and you can pick which ones you like and make it your own. So the first one I'm going to do is this moon shape. So I'm just going to grab a cup that's about the size of the circle that I want. Then I'm also going to grab a white pencil crayon. You can also use a white paint marker, whatever you have here, but the white pencil crayon shows up nicely. I'm just going to trace the line of where I want this moon to be. So once I have that line traced, I'm going to go ahead and grab some blue paint. I'm going to make a line of blue paint all across this line, but on the outside of the line. So all the way around the outside of the line, I'm going to make a strong blue line here, the outside of the moon here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe off the excess paint on my brush, so my brush has almost no paint on it, and I'm going to start to feather it out. So this is going to be a light halo coming from the moon. So we want the color to be the strongest, closest to the line, and then as we move our way out, we're going to feather that out. And so to feather it or blend it out, if you will, you're just going to use a brush with almost no paint and just go back and forth along that line. And as you can see, it starts to blend out, and that's really what we want. We want the light effect or the halo effect to be the strongest, the closest to the moon. And then as we move away, we want it to be blending out. So we're going to keep doing that until we're happy with the light kind of fading out. And then once we're going to go ahead and grab a little bit more blue and just add to that first line that we created. So we want to just add some color strength back into the first line. So that's what I'm going to do here. You can really see the difference between this line that I'm making and then the line that I faded out. And that's what we want, because we want to create this light effect of the light kind of being the strongest around the moon and then fading out. Next, I'm going to go and get some white paints and clean my brush off completely so it's pretty stark white here. And then I'm going to go ahead and create the moon shape. So I'm just going to go ahead along that line still, and I'm going to draw or paint in the moon, if you will. Now you might need to re-establish that line if you can't see it anymore, that white pencil crayon line, but I could still see mine fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it without redrawing it, but if you can't see it, you can redraw it on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and follow the inside of the shape here and fill it in. And this is going to be the base to my moon. And I'm actually going to fill in the entire moon shape in this stark white color. So all the way around the edge and then all the way inside. And then once we're done doing that, then we can start to add some details to our moon and some craters and some different designs on the inside to give it that crater effect with all the little dips inside the moon. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish that base here. And then while the paint is still wet, we're going to go ahead and create some different designs. So I'm just going through and finishing up, adding in my first layer of white here. And then one thing that you want to do is you want to go back and start to create some detail. So I'm going to go in with this blue color here, and I'm going to start to just move my brush around in random areas and create the idea of little craters in the moon. Now, one thing that I'm not doing is going super close to the inside or outside of the moon, the inside of the coaster where the moon ends, because that's going to be the lightest part of the moon around the edge. So I'm going to try and keep all my colors closer to the inside of the moon, which would be the right side of the moon as we're looking at it right now. So I'm going to start with that base layer of blue, and then as you can see here, I'm going to add in a little bit of black and a little bit of blue to my paintbrush and start to deepen these little craters. And you can see that I'm keeping the most of these close to the right side. So that left side that I'm going very lightly around, I want to keep that as light as possible and keep most of the craters towards the middle of what would be the moon. And then I'm going to go in with a little bit of white as well and just kind of blend everything together. So as you can see, it got pretty dark pretty quick. And so I just want to go and lighten that up with a little bit of white. And again, just kind of randomly moving my brush around, creating that design on the moon. And then what you want to do also is you want to turn the coaster and always paint the sides of the coaster. It's just going to look nicer when you're finished. So I'm going to go ahead and just add in that white part or the moon part onto the side of the coaster as well. And now when I'm done. So next I'm going to take this white paint marker and I'm going to show you how to make some constellations. Now I know not everybody's going to have this white paint marker, so I'm going to show you another way to do this as well with paint and just some painter's tape if you don't have this type of marker. So I'm going to show you two ways. So the first way is I start and I just make the little dots of the constellation with this white paint. This is a Posca marker. It's my favorite brand of paint markers, acrylic paint markers. And then I'm just going to go and connect them. So I'm connecting the constellation just with lines. So all these little dots, they just get connected with thin lines. And this is a very easy way to do this. But if you don't have this pen, I'm going to show you another way. So it will take a little bit more time, but you'll get the same effect. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of paint here. And I'm just going to do the base for the next constellation. And this I'm going to do all with paint and a paintbrush. So I'm going to go ahead and start to make my dots again. This time I'm going to make my dots with this thin detail brush here. And I just went and I Googled constellations and I picked out a couple shapes that I really liked. This one's going to have 5 dots. So I'm just going to do my 5 dots to start. And the last dot here. I'm just going to fix a dot on this lower one. And then I'm going to set that aside to dry and we're going to move on to a different one. So this next one here, I'm going to grab a little bit of red paint and a little bit of orange paint. And I'm going to start to make a little Mars planet. And with this planet, I'm just going to grab a little bit of red and a little bit of orange, and I'm going to make a smaller planet that's almost like Mars in the distance. Now, if you wanted, you could take a something to give you that, to trace to give you that exact circle, but I'm just going to freehand it here. So I'm just going to freehand a circle and fill it in with the red. And I'm not going to be too worried about getting a flat shape, because all the different little bits that you can see through kind of add some dimension to it. Then I'm going to add this white here and continue to just move and swirl my brush around and make different lines to try and create a little bit of interest to the shape here. And then I'm also going to grab a little bit of yellow paint, and this is going to be almost like a highlight for me. So I'm going to grab a little bit of the yellow, and then I'm just going to keep it concentrated just on one side of this little Mars planet here, closer to the top of the shape. So I'm going to leave the bottom of the shape mostly red and orange, and at the top of the shape I'm just going to add in a couple little flecks of this yellow color just to help give a little bit dimension to the planet. Okay, next I'm going to go back to my constellation. Now that these dots are completely dry, I'm going to add tape to create a tiny thin line between the tape. So 2 pieces of tape will go beside each other, and as you can see, there's a thin line that I'm creating, a little gap space of a thin line, and that's what I'm going to fill in with the white paint instead of using the marker. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on 2 areas here just to show you the technique, and then I'm going to fill it in with white paint. But before I fill it in with white paint, I'm actually going to use a matte medium. Now, if you don't have this matte medium, this is acrylic glazing liquid gloss. Any acrylic medium will do, but if you don't have this, you can just skip this step. But this will help get the lines extra crispy and extra clean. So it's just a clear glazing gloss that I'm going to put in between here, and then I'm going to let that dry first, and then I'll fill it in with the acrylic paint. So again, you can skip this step, but it just makes the lines extra clean. Okay, so on my 4th coaster, I'm going to go through and create the planet of Saturn. So I'm just going to take this cup and trace it so I have an idea of the type of circle I want, and then I'm going to go through and fill it in. So I'm going to use yellow paint for this and a little bit of white paint mixed together, and then I kind of want it to be a kind of like tan color or peachy color. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit of the orange here, and that's going to create that kind of sandy color that I'm looking for. And then I'm going to go through and create this circular shape here and fill it all in. Now I like to go quite slowly with a loaded brush all around the edges, and that really helps to get a nice crisp shape as I'm going across. And because this isn't my first layer of paint, it might be a little bit bumpy because the paint underneath has created some bumps and some shapes and some texture, and that's okay too. You don't want to go for perfection. This isn't a contest on whose circle is going to be the best. You just want to make it as good as you feel like you can. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish adding in this color. I'm also adding a little bit of white here so that one side of my planet, Saturn, will be a little bit lighter. And I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom with some black and make the bottom part a little bit darker. This is just going to help give the illusion of a circle, a 3-dimensional circle, as opposed to just a flat circle or a flat planet. Just make it look a little bit more realistic. So I have this lighter color at the top here, and then I'm going to go in and create a bit of a darker color. So I'm going to take a little bit of black and add it to my palette here. And then I'm going to go in with a little tiny bit of black and then create the shadow color. So when you're using black, you just want to use the tiniest bit because it'll take over your paint so fast. So I just used a very tiny amount, and then I'm going to go through and just outline the bottom part of it. I did mix in a little bit of yellow again and a little bit of white. just so it's not super intense. And I'm just going to go through and create that shadow on the bottom part of the Saturn. And then once I have that first layer on, I'm going to deepen it even a little bit more. And as you can see, I touched outside of the palette color before going in and mixing it, just to make sure I'm not mixing in too much black right away, because once you add black, you can't really go back. It will take over the color very, very fast, and it's very hard to bring it back from that. So just add in little bits of black at a time as you mix. And I'm just going to do a second line at the bottom here, just to help give it a little bit more of that round shape. And then I'm going to go in and just do the opposite once again with the top. I'm just going to add a little bit of white to the top, just to even further create the idea that this is a round Saturn. It is a three-dimensional shape, and that it's not flat. And as you can see, you can already start to see some dimension to the shape here. So I'm going to let that dry, and we're going to go back to our constellation. I want to clean off my brush to make sure that it's totally clean here, so that my lines are going to be stark white. And then I'm just going to fill in the line here. So I'm going to fill in between the gaps of the tape here that we created on both sides here, just very lightly. You don't want to use too much paint here because you don't want it to seep in underneath the tape. Right on top of where we had that glazing gloss on, or if you didn't use a glazing gloss, just right on top of the gap between the tape here. And then we're going to let that dry, and we're going to come back to it and peel off the tape. Now you want to peel off the tape very slowly, and as you can see, we're going to get a nice clean line. And this line looks exactly like the line that we got from that thin paint marker. So this is just another way to do the constellation. So as you can see, we have that nice, beautiful, crisp line there. And we're going to take off the tape on the second side here and reveal, again, a really nice, crisp line. So this is another way to do it if you didn't have the paint marker and you just had paint and some painter's tape. And then I'm just going to go through and finish off those two lines in the middle here just with the marker, as it's quite a bit faster. But here I just wanted to show you that there's different ways that you can get the same result with the painters, with the paint as well as with the paint marker. Okay, let's go back to our Saturn here, and we're going to do the rings. So the first thing I'm going to do is mix up another bit of the Saturn color. Again, you don't have to have it exact, you just want to get it kind of close to how we had it. So same thing, I'm going to use some white and some yellow, and then I'm going to use a little bit of red. And then as you can see, my brush touched the black a little bit, so it's starting to give some lines in my paint, but that's okay because that's actually what we want here. So I want a little bit of black on the bottom of my brush and a little bit of the kind of Saturn color on the top. So I'm going to take the brush and drag it across until I start to get that. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of black for the bottom and leave the top. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and trace around rings. So I'm going to start at 3/4 of the top and go through 3/4 of the bottom of the piece, just like that. Then I'm going to come back the other way and just kind of fix any areas that I wanted to be a little bit more crisp. But as you can see, it's created this kind of illusion of different colored rings going around Saturn. And I'm not going to connect it all the way to the planet there. I'm going to leave a little gap, because then I'm going to go in with the smaller brush and pick up a little bit of that kind of black color here and add in a shadow there. So this is going to be like a shadow at the back of the rings that you wouldn't have seen. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side here as well. So you don't have to bring the paint of that ring part all the way to the planet circle, because we're going to fill that in after. And then one last thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and pick up a little bit more of that kind of charcoal color paint, the Saturn color mixed in with the black, and I'm going to add in another shadow. This is going to be a shadow on top of the actual Saturn planet itself from the rings. So as you can see at the corners here, I'm going to create a little bit of a curved shape on both sides, and that's going to show the rings kind of wrapping around the planet here. So again, we're trying to create the illusion of this circular planet being circular and not just a flat shape. So curving this line around the two sides will help us do that. And yeah, that's going to be the base of our coasters here. So those are the base, and next we're going to move on to stars. Okay, so you want to grab a old toothbrush here and a little bit of water. As you can see, there's just a little bit of water in this cup. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add in a little dollop of white paint. You don't need that much for this, and you want it to be very, very watery. And then you're going to go through with the paintbrush and mix it. And this is one of my favorite parts, is creating these stars. So you want to mix it as thoroughly as you can so there aren't any white clumps, and the paint will be very, very watery. I'm going to grab a glove and bring back my paint mixture here, and then I'm going to spray it onto the coasters. Now, the technique is I'm going to take my thumb here and just bring it across the bristles like this, and that's going to create a little spray. So here we go. You want to aim your brush down when you do this, and you can see the little splatter effects start to go everywhere. So just make sure when you're doing this, you don't have anything around that you don't want to get paint on, because sometimes these little splatters, they fly everywhere. So just make sure that your surface is covered well before you're doing this. But you just want to go through and add in stars in a kind of a random way with this little splatter pattern everywhere. And it creates the really awesome stardust particles that we want in our galaxy coasters. And I love doing this. It's just so much fun. It's fun to watch the paint kind of fly and see what you get. And then when you're done, you want to let that dry completely. Next, I'm going to show you a technique to get a little bit of a stardust effect around a star. So here I'm going to mix a very, very light blue, and I'm going to take off the excess from my brush because I just want a very tiny amount. This is going to create a little light halo. So what we want to do is we want to create a circle, and in this circle we're going to go back into it after and add in a little white dot. So you want enough space to add a white dot in the center after. But as you can see, you want it to be blended out quite a bit. And the way to do that is to have only a very tiny amount of paint on your brush. So you almost want your brush to be like dry brush with just a tiny, tiny bit of paint. And then as you run out of paint, you can grab a little bit more, but you just want to create these little stardust effects everywhere that you feel like doing it. So just randomly around each of the pieces. And then you're going to go through with white. And this is kind of the opposite. You want your brush to be loaded up with this white. And you're just going to do one little dot in the center of that little light halo. And as you can see, it creates this effect of the light kind of dispersing around the little star here. So I love doing this. I think it creates these beautiful light orbs and is so nice and such a nice addition. And we use blue paint with this, but you can also do this with the red or the pink paint. And then I'm going to go through and just add in some stars just on their own. So some stars with the halo effect and some stars just plain that are bigger in different areas. And this gives the dimension. So some stars are big, some stars are small, and it creates that kind of really interesting atmosphere effect. And one last thing I'm going to show you is to add some little twinkle stars. So the way you do this is just by making a little X and then putting a little dot in the middle. This creates that kind of effect of the star twinkling or dispersing the light in kind of a beautiful way. And I'm just doing this with the paint marker, but again, you could use the same technique to do it with the tape if you didn't have a paint marker. It would just take a little bit longer. So I'm just adding some twinkles all over anywhere I feel like. And then I'm going to move my palette out of the way, and that's it. So that's it for the painting portion. Next, we're going to move on to varnishing. So I'm going to go ahead with this varnish here and do some varnishing. So if you don't have varnish, you can skip this step, but as these are coasters, if you're really happy with the way that they came out, I would suggest doing this just to protect them. So I'm going to grab the sponge tip brush here, and then I'm just going to go ahead and do some light strokes of this varnish. One thing to keep in mind when you're varnishing is not to go back and forth over the same area multiple times. So you just kind of want to cover it once, do the brush in one direction, and just move all the way down your coaster as you go. And you could do 2 layers of varnish, but I'm just going to do the 1 layer today. And as you can see, once I reflect it in the light, it becomes nice and shiny. And as you put the varnish on, you'll notice that sometimes when you varnish a painting or these coasters, you'll see that as you put the varnish on, the colors of the paint kind of shine through a little bit more intensely and get a bit brighter. So I really like doing this little finishing touch, but again, it's totally optional. Okay, next I'm going to take that cork part. This is like a sticky cork part for the bottom of the coaster. I'm going to turn each coaster around here and peel off the back end to reveal the sticky part, and then pop this on. So I'm just going to use my 4 fingers here to line it up before I press it down. And then once I have it lined up, I'm going to push it down here and add that backing on. So this is really nice as just like a finishing touch to the coasters. And you can see that they're nice and protected here, and then they're going to protect the table that they're on as well. And that's it for this project. I hope that you guys learned a bunch of new techniques and that you found it interesting and that you can take these techniques into your painting practice moving forward. Thank you so much, and it was a lot of fun, and I just really love how these turned out. So I can't wait to use them the next time I have people over. See you in the next video. Okay guys, that's it for this project. I hope that you really enjoyed it and then you learned a lot about how to paint a galaxy and different techniques about how to create stars and stardust that you can bring into your painting practice. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next class. Bye!